Tonight, hitting a snag. Tycoon Dhammika Perera takes up an SLPP national list seat amidst conflict of interest claims. Now or never, the United Nations launches a $47 million international emergency assistance appeal for Sri Lanka while warning of a humanitarian crisis this year. Wrong target. Minister Prasanna Ranatunga locks horns with the Catholic Church on May 9th violence accusations. Tall tales. The Bar Association says PM's claims of presidential deal inaccurate and not a true reflection of events. All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9 this Friday, the 10th of June 2022.
Tomex Fellam sa visibija අවම කර දින 3ක් දක්වා ටොයිලට් එක ෆ්‍රෙෂ්ව තමයි Tomex.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening, you're watching First at 9 with me, David Ebert. Now, two new ministerial portfolios have been created with the issuing of a Gazette Extraordinary today by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The new portfolios are the Ministries of Technology and Investment Promotion and Women, Child Affairs and Social Empowerment. The Gazette has also reduced several responsibilities and state institutions coming under the Defence Ministry and reallocated them to the new Ministry of Technology and Investment Promotions. This includes among many the Department of Immigration and Immigration, the Telecommunication Regulatory Commission of Sri Lanka and the Colombo Port City Economic Commission.
Two new ministerial portfolios were created through an extraordinary gazette that was issued last night by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. According to the gazette, a new Ministry of Technology and Investment Promotion and a Ministry of Women, Child Affairs and Social Empowerment were established. Further, the new gazette has also sought to reduce the responsibilities previously held under the Ministry of Defence and place them under the new Ministry of Technology and Investment Promotion. These include the Immigrants and Emigrants Act, the Sri Lanka Telecommunications Act, the Registrations of Persons Act, the Greater Colombo Economic Commission Act, and the Colombo Port City Economic Commission Act. Accordingly, this brings the functions of the Departments of Registration of Persons, Immigration and Immigration, the Telecommunication Regulatory Commission, Sri Lanka Telecom and its subsidiaries, and the Colombo Port City Economic Commission under the new ministry. The ministry will accordingly be responsible for the formulation, implementation, monitoring and evaluation of all related projects, programs and policies. In the meantime, the Ministry of Women, Child Affairs and Social Empowerment will formulate new policies for the protection of women, children and social empowerment. As such, the ministry will oversee the functions of the National Committee on Women, the Sri Lanka Women's Bureau, the National Child Protection Authority and the National Institute of Social Development.
Now, businessman Dhammika Perera has accepted an invitation to take up the Sri Lanka Pudujana Peramuna national list parliamentary seat vacated by former Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa. Accordingly, Perera obtained membership at the SLPP today and his name has been gazetted by the Election Commission as a Member of Parliament. Perera is expected to resign from all boards of his companies.
Business tycoon Dhammika Perera has decided to accept the national list parliamentary seat in the Sri Lanka Pudujana Peramuna left vacant following the resignation of former Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa. Accordingly, Perera is expected to step down from the boards of all his companies ahead of taking oaths as a Member of Parliament. Commenting on the subject, SLPP's General Secretary Sagara Karyavasam said that Dhammika Perera's name was sent to the Election Commission to fill the vacant national list parliamentary seat. Perera has subsequently obtained Sri Lanka Pudujana Peramuna membership from the party's General Secretary. Earlier this week, sources told AdaDerana that Dhammika Perera was tipped to take up a ministerial portfolio related to the investment sector. Last night, a special gazette notification was published by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa creating two new portfolios of technology and investment promotion and women, child affairs and social empowerment. A total of 15 departments, statutory institutions and public corporations, including the Department of Immigration and Immigration, the Telecommunication Regulatory Commission of Sri Lanka, the Department of Registration of Persons and the Board of Investment have been listed under the Ministry of Technology and Investment Promotion.
Meanwhile, the Centre for Policy Alternatives has issued a statement critiquing the nomination of Dhammika Perera as a national list parliamentarian. The think tank says that Perera has a clear conflict of interest and that his name has never been included in any Sri Lanka Pudujana Peramuna district list. It warns that with his business empire spanning several sectors, Any decisions he could make could have a direct impact with significant financial benefits.
The Centre for Policy Alternatives has issued an official statement on the nomination of Dhammika Perera as the Sri Lanka Pudujana Peramuna National List parliamentarian. The CPS says that Perera was not a member of the SLPP until days ago and that his name was not included in the list of persons qualified to be elected as members of parliament in accordance with Article 99A of the Constitution or any district list submitted by the SLPP for the August 2020 parliamentary election. It says that with Perera having business interests in several public and private limited companies covering several important sectors in the economy, all decisions made by him as a legislator and possibly as a future minister would have a significant and direct impact on these companies and sectors, creating a direct conflict of interest. It points out that such conflicts of interest would be resolved by his resignation from his positions, as he would nonetheless stand to gain significant financial benefits. The CPS says that the circumstances make it all the more important why citizens of Sri Lanka should have known of the potential of Mr. Perera being appointed to Parliament when they voted in the parliamentary election held in August 2020. It also adds that if businesses that Perera has interest in enters into or continue with contracts made by or on behalf of the state or a public corporation could be a violation of Article 91, Section 1E of the Constitution.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe told Parliament today that he has requested the Secretary-General of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association to hold an inquiry into the May 9th violence in Sri Lanka. Speaking at a vote of condolence on behalf of slain former parliamentarian Amarakirti Athukorala, the Premier added that the murder of the MP was a direct blow that was struck at the country's parliamentary system. Meanwhile, former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa accused the country's protesters of having blood on their hands.
මේ කුරුර ඝාතනය ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍රවාදී නව සමාජයක් යයි කියාගන්නා වෙස්මුණු කාර්යයන් විසින් කළ බව දැන් මුළු රටත් ලොවත් දන්නවා. රජයට හිතවත්ව සිටපු අයට ඔවුන්ගේ ගෙවල් දොරවල් දේපොළ ඇති වුණු හානිය පිළිබඳ වහාමේ අයට වන්දි දීමට පාර්ලිමේන්තුව අවදිමත් වෙනු ඇත.
ඒ අභාවයේ සිදු වුණු ඒ ම්ලේච්ඡ ක්‍රියාව අපි දකින්නේ මහජන නියෝජිතේ ඝාතනය කරපු ත්‍රස්ත ක්‍රියාවක් හැටියට. එතුමා ඒ අභාවයට පත් වුණු ඒ දිනය අපි දකින්නේ ජාතික කළු දිනයක් හැටියට.
ඒ ඝාතනය කියන්නේ පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට ගහපු පාරක් හැටියට. මේක අපේ ක්‍රමයට වැදුණු පාරක් හැටියට. മന്ത്രിවරුත් ඔක්කොම දුන්න කනගාටුව ප්‍රකාශ කිරීම ඒත් එක മന്ത്രിවරයෙක් ඒක කරේ නැහැ. මේකට අනුබල දුන්නා. මම කියවන්නම් මැයි 20 වෙනිදා හැන්සාඩ් වාර්තාවේ රාසමාණික්ක මැතිතුමා කියන එක. 20 වෙනි සංශෝෂණය වාගේ රටට අහිතකර දේවල් වලට ඡන්දෙ දුන්නේ නිසා තමයි ගෙවල් ගිනි තිබ්බේ. ජනතාව පාවා දීම තමයි ජනමතය පාවා දීසා තමයි ඒගොල්ලන්ට උනේ කියන එක මතක තබා ගන්න. කොහොමද මේ පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ මන්ත්‍රීයෙක් එහෙම කතා කරන්නේ? මේ ගෙවල් ගිනි තියෙන එක එතුමා අනුමත කරනවද? මේ මරණ එක අනුමත කරනවද? මේ සභාවේ මට ඒක අහන්න තියෙනවා. එතුමා කනගාටුව ප්‍රකාශ කළා මේක ඉල්ලාස් කරගත්තේ නැත්නම් කතානායකතුමාට ඒක විභාග කළා අදාළ කොමිටියට දාලා අපිට වාර්තාවක් දෙන්න කියලා මම කියනවා.
හය පාරක් අග්‍රාමාත්‍යතුමා කරපු ප්‍රකාශය ඉතාමත්ම වැරදි ප්‍රකාශයක්. මගේ විනාඩි 30ක කතාවෙන් කෑල්ලක් අරගෙන ප්‍රකාශය කරේ. ඒක එහෙම දේවල් කරන්න එපා. එතුමාගේ ගැනත් අපි කතා කරනවා නම් බටලන්දේ report එක වගේ දේවල්
I expect your condolence, but other than that don't make any comments regarding that. Thank you.
ජනතාව අතරේ ආර්ථික අර්බුදය නිසා කලකිරීමක් තිබෙන බව ඇත්ත. මේ වගේ අර්බුදයකදී ජනතාව විරෝධතාවල යෙදෙන බවත් ඇත්ත. නමුත් ඒවා මිනිමරන්න තරම් දුරදිග යන්නේ දීපල ගිනි තියලා, ගේ දොර ගිනි තියලා විනාශ කරන තරම් දුරදිග යන්නේ. ඒවා මෙහෙවන අය ඒ පිටුපසින් ඉන්න නිසා. අරගල කරුවන් හිත්වල වෛරය අත්වල ලේ තැවිලි තිබෙනවා.
මේ රට සිංහල බෞද්ධ රටක්ද කියන්නවත් හිතෙන්නේ නැහැ. මේ ගෙවල් ගිනි තියන්න කුරුරු මිලේච්ච වැඩ කරන්න නායකත්වය දුන්න ගම්මට්ටමේ ස්වාමින් වහන්සේලා. මගේ ගෙදරට ගහන්න ආවෙත් මහාචාර්ය හාමුදුරු කෙනෙක්. කිනි තිබ්බෙත් හාමුදුරු කෙනෙක්. එදා 9 වෙනිදා දැක්කම අපි දැක්ක කාලිනුන් වහන්සේ අර සෝවිත හාමුදුරුවෝයි වාඩි වෙලා මේ සිටියාගෙන මොකද්ද කිව්වේ? ගහපියව කියන එක නෙමෙයිද කිව්වේ නොකියා. ජනතා විමුක්ති පෙරමුණේ නායකයෝ කිව්වේ නැද්ද ඒක? අපි දැක්ක වීඩියෝ පටියක් පල්ලිවල ගාන්ටාර ගහලා මිනිස්සුන්ගේ ගෙවල් ගිනි තියන්න ගහන්න පූජකවරු කටයුතු කරා. කතෝලික පල්ලිවලිනුත් මේව පිටිපස්සේ හිටියා. පන්සල් විතරක් නෙමෙයි ආගමික නායකයෝ මේට වඩා රට ගැන කතා කරනවා. අනිත් හැම බම්බුවම කතා කරනවා. හාමුදුරුවන්ගේ පල්ලිවල යුතුයකම් ගැන කතා කරන්නේ මේක කිව්වම හෙට හාමුදුරුවෝ මනි මගේ පාංශු කුල්ටේට එන්නේ නැහැ කියයි. මට කමක් නැහැ. අපි දැන් මේව කතා කරන්න ඕනි කාලය ඇවිල්ලා තියෙනවා.
අද අපිට පේනවා ගෙවල් ගිනි තියපු මැරීන්ට උසාවියෙන් අප දෙනවා. ඒ කියන්නේ අධිකරණයත් මැරීන්ගේ පැත්තද කියලා තමයි අපිට අහන්න වෙන්නේ. අද මේ මැරීන්ට නීතියෙන් අතට අරන් තියෙනවා. මුලින්දම අපි ඒකට ඉඩ දුන්න නිසා තමයි අද ජනාධිපති කාර්යාලයටවත් යන්න බැරි අවස්ථාවක් උදා වෙලා තියෙන්නේ. ඒකට ඉඩ දීම නිවටකමක් සහ නිවටකම ප්‍රදර්ශනය කිරීමක් හැටියට තමයි දකින්නේ.
එතුමාගේ මරණය ගැන ඉක්මන් පරීක්ෂණයක් පවත්වලා කතානායකතුමා හරහා ට්‍රයල් ඇඩ් බාර් එකක් ස්ථාපිත කළා ඒ ත්‍රස්තවාදී ක්‍රියා කරපු අයට දඩුවම් දෙන්න කටයුතු කරන්න ඕනේ.
Now, the spokesperson for the Archdiocese of Colombo, Father Cyril Gamini, vehemently rejected allegations that it was the Catholic clergy who instigated acts of violence on the 9th of May. The allegations had been levelled by Minister Prasanna Ranatunga today during Parliament proceedings. Father Cyril Gamini went on to question why the intelligence services, police and army did not prevent the attacks if they had prior knowledge.
The Archdiocese of Colombo today refuted allegations levelled by Minister Prasanna Ranatunga during today's parliamentary session that it was the cardinal and Catholic priest that had instigated members of the public to act violently on the 9th of May.
පළවෙනියෙන්ම කියන්න කැමති අපි මේ ප්‍රකාශය සම්පූර්ණයෙන්ම ප්‍රතික්ෂේප කරනවා. කතෝලික සභාවක් හැටියට ඒ වගේම කාඩිනල් හිපානන් හැටියට අපි හැම අවස්ථාවකදීම උත්සාහ කරලා තියෙන්නේ මේ රටේ ඇතිවෙන්නට ගිය ගැටුම්කාරී තත්වයන් සමනය කරන්න. දැන් 9 වෙනිදා ප්‍රචණ්ඩත්වයේ ආරම්භුනේ කොහෙන්ද? ඒක ආරම්භ වෙන්නේ ගාලු මෝදර පිටියේ සාමකාමී අරගලයට පහර දීමෙන්. ඒ පහර දීම සිද්ධ වෙන්නේ අරලියගහ මන්දිරයේ සිට පැමිණි ඇමතිවරුන්, മന്ത്രിවරුන් සහ මේ රජයේ අනුගාමිකයන් පිරිසක් අතරින්. මේ සිද්ධිය සිදුවෙන්නට පෙර බුද්ධිංශය මේ රටේ ඉන්න බුද්ධිංශය දැනගෙන හිටියේ නැද්ද මේ විදිහේ දෙයක් සිදුවෙන්නට යනවා කියලා. ඒතකොට එහෙම වාර්තා කළා නම් පොලිස්පතිතුමා ඇතුළු පොලිස් නිලධාරීන් මේ ගැන දැනගෙන සිටියේම නැද්ද? මේ මාසේ 9 වෙනිදා රාත්‍රියේ සිදුවෙච්ච මිනිස් ඝාතන, ගිනි තැබීම්, ප්‍රචණ්ඩකාරී ක්‍රියාවන්, විනාශකාරී ක්‍රියාවන් මේ රටේ බුද්ධිංශ ඒ පිළිබඳව දැනගෙන සිටියේ නැද්ද? එතකොට බුද්ධිංශ දැනගෙන සිටියා නම් පොලිසියත් හමුදාවත් සියලුම මේ මහා විනාශකාරී ක්‍රියාවන්, මේ ඝාතනයන් සිදුවෙනතුරු ඒවා වළක්වා ගන්නට උත්සාහ නොකළේයි. එතකොට ඒකේ වර්ධ තිබෙන්නේ බුද්ධිංශයේද, පොලිසියේද, හමුදාවේද? එහෙම නැත්නම් හමුදාවට සහ පොලිසියට Tamanගේ රාජකාරිය ස්වාධීනව නිදහස්ව ඉටු කරන්න බාධා කරපු කවුරු හරි හිටියද? මේක ඉතින් හරිම සරල දෙයක්.
And we'll be back with more stories right after this short break. Do stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. Now, the Bar Association of Sri Lanka has responded to Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe's Parliament comments yesterday, where he claimed that it had struck a deal with President Gotabaya Rajapaksa that allowed him to stay in power. In the statement, the BASL says that the Premier's statement was inaccurate and not a true reflection of what took place during its meeting with the head of state last Wednesday.
The Bar Association of Sri Lanka has released a media statement rejecting allegations made by Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe in Parliament regarding it having reached an agreement with President Gotabaya Rajapaksa during a meeting on Wednesday. In the statement, the BSL says that the PM had claimed that it was the Bar Association which met the President on the 8th of May and arrived at an agreement with him that if the 19th Amendment was reenacted and if the executive presidency was abolished, that he could continue to be President. However, the association has rejected this statement and expressed that it is inaccurate and not a true reflection of what took place. The BSL explains that the management committee of the BSL met President Gotabaya Rajapaksa at the President's house to discuss the proposals it forwarded for the restoration of economic and political stability. The BSL says that it also met the former Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa and representatives of the independent groups of MPs, the Samagi Janabalawegya and the National People's Power at their request to discuss the proposals. The BSL says that the proposals not only included proposals on the restoration of the provisions of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution and the abolishment of the executive presidency, but also contained several proposals including the formation of a government of national unity comprising of a cabinet of 15 members. Further, the appointment of a prime minister acceptable to all political parties in parliament a common minimum program to be agreed upon by all parties, and the appointment of a 15-member advisory committee were also broached during talks. Further, the BSL iterated that there was no agreement reached with the President, as claimed by the Prime Minister. It adds that, quote, "Needless to say, the BSL is a professional organisation, and the question of arriving at an agreement between the President and the BSL never arose." Further, the BSL says that it did not give any assurances to the President that he could continue in office if he agreed to abolish the executive presidency and the 19th Amendment. The BSL reiterated that political stability is essential to restore economic order in the country, and for that purpose, its proposals, which has been agreed upon by several organizations, including the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, offer a framework for stability. It said, quote, "As a first step, the reintroduction of the provisions of the 19th Amendment could take place without any delay, followed by the implementation of a common minimum program to be achieved by the executive and the legislature to restore stability in the country and meet the aspirations of the people who are demanding accountability and an end to the corruption."
The United Nations has called for donors to assist Sri Lanka by helping collect more than $47 million as life-saving assistance for 5.7 million people worst affected by the crisis in the country at the moment. It stated that given the current crisis in the country, 86% of Sri Lankan families at the moment are currently resorting to skipping meals and reducing food intake as a means of dealing with the crisis.
The United Nations in Sri Lanka stated yesterday that it had launched a joint humanitarian needs and priorities plan to help Sri Lanka. Issuing a media communique, UN Sri Lanka is calling for $47.2 million to be contributed for life-saving assistance to 1.7 million who have been hit the worst due to the economic crisis for a 4-month period starting from this month until September. The UN says that development and humanitarian partners have estimated that close to 5.7 million women, children and men need immediate life-saving assistance in Sri Lanka. The UN also explained that 1.7 million people targeted under the Humanitarian Needs and Priorities Plan have been identified as people whose livelihoods, food security and access to health services are at risk and require immediate assistance. The initiative by UN Sri Lanka has come in response to the government's request for UN-backed multi-sector international assistance to respond to the most urgent needs arising from the recent crisis. In the communique, UN Resident Coordinator in Sri Lanka Hannah Singh Hamdi stated that multiple factors are impacting Sri Lanka's food security situation and that without immediate action, many families will be unable to meet basic food needs. This, she says, could lead to a humanitarian crisis later this year. She added that Sri Lanka's once strong healthcare system has been jeopardized, livelihoods are suffering, and the most vulnerable are facing the greatest impact. As such, Hamdi called on the international community to show solidarity with Sri Lanka and for donors to help get Sri Lanka out of the current crisis. The UN says that food production in the last harvest was 40 to 50% lower than last year, and the current agriculture season is at risk with seed, fertilizer, fuel and credit shortages. It also stated that nearly 5 million people, or 22% of the population, are currently in need of food assistance, as surveys reveal that 86% of households are using at least one coping mechanism, such as reducing food intake and including skipping meals. In the meantime, two of Australia's cricketing stars, Steve Smith and Mitchell Starc, recorded appeals to the international community to provide humanitarian aid to Sri Lanka.
We are in Sri Lanka raising awareness of the economic crisis
and encouraging friends to assist in any ways they can.
Just as our mate Shane Warne did in 2005 after the tsunami crisis, because that is what neighbours do, and we've been helping each other out for more than 75 years.
The United Nations has launched a flash appeal in Sri Lanka to support communities affected by the economic crisis.
We are proud that Australia is doing its bit. Together, we can help Sri Lanka hit this crisis for sick.
Meanwhile, following a request by Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe on Wednesday calling for a delegation from the International Monetary Fund to visit Sri Lanka for technical discussions, the IMF announced today that they would be sending staff to the island in the coming weeks. The International Monetary Fund is planning a staff-level mission in the coming weeks to Sri Lanka to engage on policy discussions on a program, the fund's spokesman Jerry Rice said yesterday in Washington. The decision comes in response to a request by Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe on Wednesday. The goal of the next mission will be to build on the technical discussions already held with Sri Lankan authorities in May. Rice stated that the timing of a staff-level agreement will depend in part on the strength of the policies that the authorities would promote.
The IMF is planning an in-person mission to Colombo in the coming weeks to engage on policy discussions on the programme, building on the technical discussions that we already held with the authorities in Sri Lanka. That was back in May. The timing of a staff level agreement would depend in part on the strength of the policies that the authorities would propose and would commit to. Again, I emphasised staff level agreement just for those of you who don't follow the IMF so closely. That's different from approval that we must have from our board, which follows the staff level agreement. We have the staff level agreement and then it goes forward to our board, and it's our executive directors who make the final decision. Because Sri Lanka's debt is assessed as unsustainable, which again we've said here before, our board approval for any programme would require adequate assurances that debt sustainability would be restored, which was the point. Very concerned about the situation, the high global food and energy prices and their impact on the Sri Lankan people. You know, we are engaging as much as we can, as actively as we can, to see how we can help. But again, too early for us to discuss magnitude of potential financing or a specific date.
Now, Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara said today that the $700 million in Indian credit lines given to Sri Lanka to purchase fuel will come to an end after the country receives a shipment on the 16th of June. The minister, however, said that India has granted approval for another $500 million credit line for Sri Lanka. In the meantime, Chairman of Electrogas Lanka Limited, Vijitha Herath, resigned from his post today.
With continued lines seen outside refilling stations, Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara responded to questions as to whether there has been a reduction in the issuance of fuel in the country.
මම අද අඩු කරලා තියෙනවා අපේ ඊළඟ සැලසුමේ හැටියට 11 වෙනිදා 12 වෙනිදා තමයි අයි බලාපොරොත්තු වන පෙට්‍රල් සහ ඩීසල් තව නෞකා දෙකක් ගන්නත් 16 වෙනිදා IOC එකෙන් ඉන්දියානු ණය ක්‍රමේන අවසාන මිතුරුලා තියෙන එකේ ඩීසල් එක බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා 22 තව අපි බලාපොරොත්තු වන පෙට්‍රල් එකක් ඒ අනුව අපි බලාපොරොත්තු වන බොරතෙල් නෞකාවක් 20ට ඉස්සෙල්ලා තව දෙවනි නෞකාව එන්න අපි දැන් ඉන්දියන් ක්‍රෙඩිට් ලයින් එකේ මිලියන 500යි 200යි දෙකම මේ නෞකාවත් එක්ක අවසන් වෙනවා ඒ වගේම තව මිලියන 500ක ණය ක්‍රමයක් ඔවුන් අනුමත කරලා තියෙනවා ඒ බලාපොරොත්තු ජුලි මාසෙන ටික කරන්න අද දවසෙත් මම ඉන්නේ එළියේ නෞකා 3ක් 4ක් ආසන්නයේ තියෙනවා ඒ නෞකා හතරට අවශ්‍ය ඩොලර් මිලියන 160ක් විතර ඕන එක නෞකාවක් තියෙනවා දැවිතෙල් නෞකාවක් දැන් දවස් 20කට වැඩිය ඩොලර් මිලියන 30ක අවශ්‍යතාවයක් LC එකක් විවෘත කරගන්න බෑ අපිට ණයවර ලිපියක් විවෘත කරගන්න බෑ දැන් වෙලා තියෙන්නේ අපිට මහා භාණ්ඩාගාරයේ අපිට මේ මහ බැංකුවේ අධිපතිතුමා ඩොලර් ප්‍රමාණයක් නිකුත් කරලා තියෙනවා දැන් සතියක් විතර ඒකට අවශ්‍ය රුපියල් ප්‍රමාණය ඩොලර් ටික මිලදී ගැනීම සඳහා අපිට අඩුවක් තියෙනවා.
In the meantime, Chairman of Electrogas Lanka Limited Vijitha Herath tendered his resignation today. The former chairperson of Sri Lanka Insurance was appointed as the chairman of the primary liquefied petroleum gas supplier in Sri Lanka in late April. Reportedly, he has resigned after an issue had arisen over the purchase of domestic LP gas cylinders.
In the meantime, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has called for public transport services to be enhanced as a method of relief for the public suffering from the fuel shortages. This is to include the launch of new train services targeting office commuters, as well as the addition of more train compartments.
During a discussion with the Ministry of Transport and Highways yesterday, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has emphasized the need to maintain an efficient and quality public transport service. The President has highlighted the extreme difficulties being faced by the people and that due to inflation and shortage of fuel, the demand for public transportation continues to increase. The President says that by providing a more efficient service, some semblance of relief can be provided to the people. The President had also called for the expansion of the park and drive system, a reduction of parking charges, the setting up of parking facilities near selected railways, the launch of the new train services targeting office commuters, as well as an addition of more train compartments. Further, the systematic supply of fuel for trains and buses was also discussed, where the attention was brought to supplying fuel for private buses at night time through petrol stations operated by the Sri Lanka Transport Board. Meanwhile, during the review meeting of the Ministry of Ports, Shipping and Aviation, the President called out irregularities being reported at the auction of imported goods confiscated at the port. The President insists that the regulatory body must act to crack down on such activities, considering that the port of Colombo operates with the globe's leading shipping firms. He further added that imported essential items must be released without delay and that the government establishments such as Sathusa could help prevent corruptions and attract more revenue to the government through sales of these goods. Furthermore, progress of the construction of Terminal 2 at the Bandaranaike International Airport and the Eastern Jetty at the Colombo Port was also discussed in detail.
Sri Lankan shares ended marginally higher today but posted their second consecutive weekly fall. The CSE All Share Price Index ended up 0.2% at 7,898 points, but it fell 1.9% for the week. The S&P SL20 Index of liquid stocks ended up 0.5% or 13.13 points to close at 2,580.87. Trading volumes rose to 60.2 million shares from 46.9 million shares in the previous session. The equity market turnover was 1.33 billion Sri Lankan rupees, data showed. Foreign investors were net buyers in the equity market, purchasing 28.6 million Sri Lankan rupees worth of shares, while domestic investors were net sellers, offloading 1.3 billion rupees worth of shares, according to exchange data. And that's all the news we have for you tonight. We hope you join us tomorrow at the same time. Good night.